Hi, fourth graders, and welcome back to Sunlevel Learning Labs for fourth grade ELA. Today we are going to be covering reading text with a timeline. Our primary focus for today's lesson is on how to correctly read a timeline in a text. Okay, so to begin, we are going to cover our objective. Our objective today is I can read a text that includes a timeline, interpreting the information and how it contributes to the understanding of a text. So today we are going to be reading a text, an article, which includes a timeline, and we are going to take that information from the timeline and figure out exactly how it contributes to the understanding of the text as a whole. So what I want you guys to do is take a moment to read the objective in your head, read the objective out loud to a parent, teacher, or friend, and really take a moment to focus on what we will be learning today through our lesson. Okay, so what information does a timeline add to a text? Timelines add more information to the text and allows readers to have a better understanding of the information. Specific dates and events allow readers to gain additional information that may not have been included in the text. And timelines help the reader better understand the text. So normally on a timeline, it includes specific dates and specific events that may not have been included in the text. And this allows the reader to understand more information about the text and understand exactly where and when this information occurred on a specific timeline. Interpreting information from a timeline. The information included on a timeline provides additional information for the reader. So as previously stated, the main focus of the timeline is to provide more information for the reader. A timeline provides additional information that has not been included in the text, or it may have been included in the text but not really focused on with extensive details and facts. It is important for the reader to pay close attention to both the text and the timeline when a timeline is present in the text. So if you are reading a text that includes a timeline, it's very important to pay attention to that timeline and really read through it thoroughly to see what information it brings to the text. A timeline is like a number line, but instead of just showing numbers, it shows important events in the order that they occurred. So I'm sure you guys all know what a number line is. You probably have seen it in math. A timeline is very similar to that, but instead of just showing numbers, it shows important events. And it's important to remember these events are listed in the order that they occurred. And information in a timeline is always accorded to dates, ordered according to dates. So the information always goes from left to right, and it's always in order of the dates that the events occurred. Features of a timeline. Timelines can be both horizontal or vertical. So timelines can go left to right or top to bottom. Significant events are included on a timeline. So when we're looking at a timeline, it is most of the time including important events that have happened over a period of time. Information, as stated before, is ordered left to right, or if it is a vertical timeline, it's from top to bottom. Events are listed in chronological order, allowing the reader to follow the information correctly. Chronological order is by date, as we said before, and two of the most important features of a timeline are the title and the labels. The title of the timeline is normally at the top of the timeline, and labels are included to allow the reader to understand what the importance of the dates are. So labels can be thought of as captions. Labels are there to allow us to understand what exactly occurred on that certain date. When we are reading a timeline, make sure to read a timeline left to right if horizontal and top to bottom if vertical. Focus on the information the timeline is giving us that we might not have learned just from reading the text. So if you are reading a timeline and you notice there's new information coming in the timeline that was not given to you while you read the text, pay close attention to that information. It probably is important. Number 3, make connections from the timeline to the text. So when you're reading this information in the timeline, think to yourself, what does this have to do with the text? How is this important to the text? Number 4, pay close attention to the title and the labels. So the title of the timeline is most likely going to let us know what the timeline is going to be about. And by paying attention to the labels, you are going to be able to understand what the important dates mean and what occurred on these dates. And number 5, think about what the author is trying to tell us. If an author has included a timeline in a text, it's probably there for a reason. So think to yourself, why did the author include this? What is the importance of this timeline? So here I decided to include a timeline for myself, just so you guys could see a timeline and how to read it from left to right, and how to read it with the title and the labels. So at the top is our title. The title is Miss Holman's Special Events in Her Life Timeline. So if we start all the way to the left, in 1999, July 21st, 1999, Miss Holman was born in Illinois. In 2001, Miss Holman's first brother was born on Halloween. Next, in 2005, Miss Holman started kindergarten. In 2008, Miss Holman's second brother was born. In 2013, Miss Holman graduated 8th grade and began high school. In 2016, Miss Holman turned 16 and got her driver's license. In 2017, Miss Holman graduated high school and began at ASU. In 2020, which is present, Miss Holman is beginning her senior year at ASU in student teaching. So in each of the pink boxes, you guys will notice the labels and captions for these important years, what happened on these dates. I just included big events that happened in my life over the period of my life so far. You notice there's some gaps in between the years, which is okay. Sometimes timelines look like that. They can go over an extended amount of time, or they could be within a shorter amount of time, like 10 days, 20 days. But mine was over 21 years for the period of my life. Now I want you guys to pause the video and take a moment to grab a piece of paper and a pencil, please. We will need this for our next activity, which is a read aloud of an article with a timeline. So take a moment to pause, and when you are ready, unpause and we will begin. Okay guys, welcome back. So at this point, everyone should have a piece of paper and a writing utensil in front of them. So on this piece of paper, I want you guys to draw a web organizer similar to this one. We are going to be completing this web organizer while reading the article. And in your web organizer, I want you guys to write details from both the text and the timeline. So include details that you think are important from the text and details that you think are important from the timeline as well. And in the middle, you will put the title for the article that we are going to be reading. We will not be going over this web organizer. I just want you guys to be filling this out as we read to keep everyone on task, to keep everyone focused, to really be focusing on the details that we are addressing throughout the text and the timeline. So take a moment again to pause the video and draw the shell for your web organizer. And you shouldn't have anything written in it yet because we don't know the title of the article and we know no details about the article yet. Draw as many little bubbles around your main circle as you think you're going to need. You can always add more as we read. Okay, during our read aloud, feel free to pause the video throughout to have more time to read or to look at the timeline. Look up any words that you are unfamiliar with or are confusing to you. Take your time when completing the web organizer and pause for extra time if needed. Okay, so the name of our article is Volcanoes, Magma Rising. Mount Pelée erupts. So what you guys can do right now is write that inside of the middle bubble of your web organizer. Okay, the text is provided courtesy of ALOUD, the American Museum of Natural History's website for children. Now we will begin reading our article. Some volcanoes explode with the force of an atomic bomb. Others spill rivers of gently flowing lava. What causes volcanoes to erupt? How do scientists study them? Let's explore one of the most powerful, destructive volcano eruptions in history. If we look at the picture, it says, the city of St. Paris with Mount Pelée in the distance. So you can see the volcanic mountain in the distance. And then more than a century ago, the city of St. Paris was known as the Paris of the Caribbean, located on the island of Martinique. St. Paris was a center of trade in rum, sugar, cocoa, and coffee. Its boulevards were lined with beautiful homes and shops. But in the spring of 1902, all of that changed. On the morning of May 8th, the nearby volcano, Mount Pelée, exploded in a burst. A swirling cloud of hot gas, ash, and rocks, called a pyroclastic flow, rushed down the mountainside at 480 kilometers per hour, or 300 miles per hour. It burned everything in its path, including the town of St. Paris, and nearly all the ships in the harbor. Within 2 minutes, close to 30,000 people were dead. A disaster unfolds, 1902. No one ever thought of fearing the volcano, which all thought to be extinct. The people wandered about by thousands, never dreaming there was any danger. And that comes from J. Chatney, a St. Paris resident who moved away before the eruption. At the time, people living on the islands of Martinique and St. Vincent underestimated the risk of living near. Volcanoes. They had ignored signals that volcanoes were still active. Okay, now we have our timeline. If we look at the top, we can see our title of the timeline, which is Timeline of the Eruption. So if we start from left and we go to the right, according to the dates, it starts on April 23rd. On April 23rd, earthquakes shake dishes from shelves in St. Paris. On April 24th, fine ash from Mount Pelée falls for 2 hours on a town nearby. On May 2nd, a column of ash and fumes rises nearly 3 kilometers, 2 miles above the mountain. An inch of ash covers St. Paris. Just from those first 3 dates, already a lot of new information is being brought into this text through the timeline. Not any really of this information was covered in our text this far, and this is all important information to help us better understand the text and better understand the eruption. On May 5th, a mud flow from Mount Pelée kills 23 people north of the city. 15 minutes later, a small tsunami reaches St. Paris. On May 6th, Mount Pelée spews columns of gas and ash and flings huge molten rocks in the air. On May 7th, Mount Safri, a volcano 120 kilometers or 75 miles north of the island of St. Vincent, erupts, and a boiling mud flow of steam and ash, killing 1,565 people. So that was before Mount Pelée even exploded. 75 miles north, 1,565 people were already killed from something similar. On May 8th is when the Mount Pelée explodes, destroying the town of St. Paris. On May 20th, a second eruption covers the now desolate town of St. Paris. On May 31st, the volcano's dome rises nearly 300 meters, or 1,000 feet. A spine called the Needle of Pelée juts above it. Within a couple of months, the needle collapses. So again, that was more information that was not included in the text that we didn't know about until we read the timeline. So it's really important to take in this information that we just gained from the timeline. Maybe add in some more details into your web organizer about what information you gained from the timeline as well. Our last bit of the article says, news of the disaster horrified the world. Geologists were drawn to Martinique to understand the science behind the tragedy. The American Museum of Natural History sent geologist Edmund Hovey. Take a look at what Edmund Hovey saw and collected. So these are all pictures of different artifacts that Edmund Hovey collected from the volcanic eruption of Mount Pelée. And it says, once a vibrant city, St. Paris, as Hovey found it, was now a smoldering ruin with barely a brick left standing. Even photographs do not convey an adequate idea of what has happened, wrote Hovey. So there's nothing left to this town after this volcanic eruption. Okay, now we are going to cover the details from the timeline and details from the text. So these different details that I am going to be reading could be details that you have written on your web organizer. If not, it's totally okay. There are no incorrect answers. The purpose of the web organizer was really just to get you guys thinking and to be focused on the text as well as the timeline. So some details we gained from the text were St. Paris was known as the Paris of the Caribbean a century ago, which was 100 years ago. And on the morning of May 8th, 1902, the nearby volcano Mount Pelée exploded. The volcano burned everything in its path, including St. Perry. Within 2 minutes, close to 30,000 people had died. So those are all details that we had just gained from primarily the text. That was all the information we gained from the text, and now we will go over the information we gained from the timeline also. So from the timeline, we learned on April 23rd, small earthquakes shake the town of St. Perry. Ash fumes rise 2 miles above the mountain. An inch of ash covers the town. After the first big eruption that killed 30,000 people, there was another one 12 days later, covering the empty town. Lastly, the volcano's dome rises and within months had completely collapsed. So if you notice on the right side with the details from the timeline, we had all different information than the details that we had learned from the text. Other than on the timeline and in the text, we learned that 30,000 people had died, and we learned that the initial eruption occurred on May 8th. But the timeline was able to help fill in some blanks we might have had, give us some more information, and have a better overall understanding of the text and what occurred. So what does the timeline add to the text? The timeline adds a more detailed explanation of what occurred during the volcanic eruption. Exact dates allowing the reader to have a full understanding of when the events occurred. Details that were not addressed throughout the article are included in the timeline. And details about the second eruption that were not included in the article were included in the timeline. Ultimately, the timeline adds more depth to the article and allows the reader to better understand the volcanic eruption with more details. Lastly, we are going to go over what we learned today. So first off, we learned that timelines are important to a text. If we see a timeline in a text, we must be sure to read that timeline, because that timeline is probably there in order to add to the text and in order to give us a better understanding of the text. We learned how to read a text that includes a timeline, interpreting information from the timeline and applying it to the text. We learned how to read a timeline correctly and the features of a timeline. We learned the importance of a timeline being included within a text and what we can gain from understanding how to read a timeline. So after everything we learned today, we have hit our objective that we went over in the beginning. Awesome job today, everyone. And tomorrow we will learn how to read graphs and charts in a text, and it will be tons of fun. All right, bye, fourth graders.